He's been with the American Association of Medical Colleges. He's written in Science, for those of you who have subscribed to that magazine, that journal. And he also has, I think, 2 publications, 2 books on the topic that he's going to address us with today, and that is behavioral games as it applies to physician learning. Dr. Myron Fox. Dr. Fox.
Thank you. There are several advantages I notice in coming from California. One is that you can wear shorts, whereas the Easterners wear a suit, and that you can wear a mock turtleneck shirt where we wear a tie. I'd like to start today by getting into the applicability of game theory in the field of medicine and in the field of teaching. Now, when von Neumann and Morgenstern started with game theory, it was not long before they realized that game theory was not primarily concerned with disclosing the optimum strategy. What it really is concentrating on is concerned with the logic of conflict, that is, with the theory of strategy. Now, in this way, interestingly enough, being here at the gambling state of Nevada, the question could be asked, does game theory differ from gambler's choice? And it does differ, and it differs in very interesting ways, and these ways I think are applicable in our field. For example, in a gambling theory, in the game of poker, a gambler supposedly selects the possibility of the number of cards that are being dealt out, the number of players, and he correlates this as to his chances of receiving a certain card, set of cards, a 10-ace hand, which would be superior to that of his opponents. Now, in game theory, there are more factors than that which are involved, and we'll get into those in a little bit. Game theory is broken, really, into 2 areas. The zero-sum area, which has to do with one party versus another party, where there is a conflict of interest between the 2 parties, out of which one is to emerge victorious and one is to be defeated. Now, in that regard, of course, the standard easiest game is tic-tac-toe. And as you know, this has now been analyzed to the point where it is no longer a game, because it must end in a draw. Checkers, virtually the same situation exists. Chess, there have supposedly been a whole variety of differences. Chess does not come under this category because there are a whole series of potential changes which can occur in chess. Rappaport mentions in an article that many years ago, Capablanca, playing the great Cuban champion, played Marshall, the American champion, and Marshall, at the particular point of the crucial game, opened with a very alien, a very strange, a very foreign opening. And Capablanca, having a time in which he could think about this, instead of folding up, which he said was his first reaction, and becoming panicky, instead thought for a moment and came back and accepted the challenge of Marshall and won, thus proving that he won because of a gamesmanship. He outplayed Marshall. He outplayed Marshall psychologically, as well as outplaying Marshall on the board. Now, however, Mr. Rappaport, I think in the article, made a mistake. And the mistake is this. In discussing a game like chess, which is a mano-mano situation of one person versus another person, he says that there is no chance involved, whereas in the game of poker, although you have the same situation, chance is involved. And that chance is the chance of the deal, the first distribution of cards. What cards will be given to each player? And that is where there is a difference, according to Rappaport. However, that difference also exists in chess, to this degree. Unless a specifically even number of games, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, etc., are played, one player will have an advantage in the sense that he will draw the white piece. White moves first. The first move in any chess game is considered by chess professionals to be extremely valuable. In fact, there is an anecdote. Many years ago, there was a very great Russian chess player named Bogolyubov, back in the days of the Tsar, and his standard comment upon his play was, when I am white, I win because I am white, and when I am black, I win because I am Bogolyubov. And there is a great value here, because it shows that one does not have to be Bogolyubov necessarily to win when one is white. Now, This games theory, translated or carried on to its next step, is obviously no good in a dogfight. The motivation in a fight is hostility. The goal is to totally eliminate the opponent. This is not true in games. In games, the idea is to out-logic the opponent, if you will, to reduce that fight to a level of more amicable confrontation. And this, gentlemen, I think is perhaps where the value of game theory lies in our profession. I would like to come back to that, if I may, a little later. Pursuing instead, as we are now, the theory of games and how it pertains, the value of a game, the value of parlor games as games, is because they are instances of formalized conflict. Games are instances of formalized conflict. You have not, as I said, in games theory, you don't get the optimum strategy, but you get a choice of many strategies. In a sense, medically, one might say, a patient comes in and says, "Doctor, I have a pain, lower right quadrant." And you say, "All right, the element of chance is he has one of X, Y, and Z." Most people who come in between the ages of 25 and 45 with a pain in that area suffer from this particular disease. And so you say, "Fine, I will have, this is my diagnosis," immediately after let's say a normal procedure in the clinic. Now, games wouldn't help you there, because games says you have to go into more possibilities. In a sense, it is the application, if you will, of general systems where the entire man, the entire thing is discussed in relation to the ill of that patient. And certainly in the area of mental illness, or of training those who have to involve themselves with mental illness, this has enormous value. This at least is our opinion. Now, I would like to give a couple of specific examples, if I may, of game theory. We've seen in chess where there is a man versus a man situation. One must lose. Now, there are situations where both people can win, or both people can lose to a lesser degree. Rappaport uses a rather, I think, charming example in the opera Tosca. Now, those of you who are not familiar with it, the story of the opera is that Tosca, who is in love with Cavaradossi, and she is coveted, if that's quite the right word, by Scarpia, and Scarpia has arrested her lover, Cavaradossi, and holds him under penalty of death. Now, a great confrontation, or rather discussion, not a confrontation, it's a games theory, takes place between Tosca and Scarpia. Tosca wants to free Cavaradossi. Scarpia wants to have Tosca's body. How can they achieve their ends, and how can each one defeat the other? It is important to Scarpia that Cavaradossi die. So Tosca is informed by Scarpia that if she will give herself to him, he will see to it that the firing squad, when it fires the volley at Cavaradossi, will not fire live ammunition, but blank ammunition. And so Cavaradossi will be spared. Now Tosca faces this problem. If she gives in to Scarpia, she will free Cavaradossi, provided Scarpia does not double-cross her. If, on the other hand, Scarpia does double-cross her, she will have given in to Scarpia, and Cavaradossi will be dead, and she will have nothing to gain. Now, there are very few people, and certainly damn few women, who would accept such a situation. Scarpia, on the other hand, if he does not if he permits the firing squad to spare Cavaradossi, has spared a mortal enemy, his position is one of great authority. His authority is questioned by doing this, and in a sense, he is defeated. Tosca determines, therefore, to double-cross Scarpia. Scarpia determines to double-cross Tosca. As a result, as Scarpia embraces Tosca, she kills him. She kills him. He has not given the order yet to the firing squad to change to blanks. Cavaradossi is killed. Scarpia, in true opera tradition, survives long enough to realize that she knows Cavaradossi is dead, and she stands there with that marvelous last long high C scream, and the opera ends with the following gamesmanship, if you will, or games theory result. Tosca has not lost totally. Scarpio has not lost totally. He's dead. Cavaradossi is dead. Tosca survives, but she has won a partial victory. Now, in game theory, that same partial victory could have been achieved had Tosca given in to Scarpio and then gotten Cavaradossi, had Scarpio accepted her and then spared Cavaradossi. Now, we won't get into the moral aspects of that. This is a question of tainted goods or whatnot, which is really not, has no value in the theory of games. But we can assume then that there were two possible ways, aside from total victory, for Tosca to emerge from this successfully. Tosca is, of course, our heroine. She chose the one which resulted in the death of her lover. The other one would have resulted in sparing her lover, but perhaps she would have had pangs of anguish for the remainder of her life. Which was the wiser choice? That, I think, is up to someone who will decide to write a sequel to the opera or to whatever changes we have in our moral atmosphere in the future. Now, there are other examples that Rappaport gives in game theory, and one of the most interesting is the A, B, and C involved in distribution. Now, this has to do, up until now we've talked about one person versus another person situation. Now we get a situation where a dollar is discovered. The dollar must be divided between A, B, and C. Dollar, of course, mathematically will not so divide. A and B decide to get together. That is, A says to B, look, if you will vote for me, we'll shut out C, and I'll give you 55 cents of that dollar, and I'll keep 45 cents. So B says, that's a hell of a thing. And C is over on the other side of the room, and he notices this going on, so he goes over and he gets hold of B, and he says, listen, he says, I'll give you 60 cents, and I'll keep 40, we'll shut A out. And he says, that's even better. Now, by this time, A is aware of what's going on, and he decides, well, the hell with this, and he gets together with C, and he says, look, he says, let's us take it, we'll cut B out. We'll take 45 cents a piece, or we'll take, I'll take 50 and give you 45 and whatnot, 55, 45, and that way we will divide the dollar. Now, a fourth party could have interfered here. And that fourth party, if you will, feel you gentlemen are involved in, could have suggested that each one take 33 cents of that dollar and they give that vagrant penny to charity. Therefore, they would have shared virtually equally. In the total sum, they would have shared absolutely equally, because the missing penny would not have profited any one of the three. Now, in examples of this nature, we can see really, I think, what von Neumann was after when he pursued the theory of games to what he considered a field of logical conclusion. Now, there is a thing I should like to read, which is the value of game theory is not in the specific solutions it offers in a highly simplified and idealized situation, which is largely what we've discussed here. These idealized situations which may occur in formalized games but hardly ever do in real life. Rather, the prime value of the theory is that it lays bare the different kinds of reasoning that apply in different kinds of conflict. The different kinds of reasoning that apply in different kinds of conflict. Now, the greatest of these does not lie in the field of mathematics. It lies in the field of human relationships, of psychology, of psychiatry, and perhaps above all in the training of that group which must eventually carry this to the general public. Now, anything that causes us to enlarge or amplify the reasoning that applies to different kinds of conflict has enormous value. It must have enormous value. Without it, we become terribly hidebound, very strict. We operate strictly on the basis of chance, and if you will, a gambler's approach, rather than the approach of a learned person who seeks new solutions. Now, much work has been done in the attempt to transfer some of game theory into various fields of social studies. Not that much has really been done in translating it into the field of psychiatry and the training of psychiatrists. Now, one of the things that we might discuss is it possible to take a conflict, a patient, if you will, who comes to you in conflict, And I might translate that into the situation of a dogfight. A man who comes in with such great hostility, enmity, violence. Could game theory possibly be used to reduce that hostility to a level of tractability? I suppose in a sense I could say, if you can't cure a cold and the guy comes in with a cold and then he gets pneumonia, well, you can give him a specific for that. Can you transfer his illness? I don't know. I really don't know. It is a thought. I think it's a provocative. To pursue game theory to its nth degree, I would like to mention this to you. Game theory, when it is pursued beyond its elementary paradox-free formulations, juxtaposed, if you will, upon any other theme, teaches us what we must be able to do in order to bring the intellect to bear on the science of human conflict. Now this is important because this is perhaps where we're talking not just of the sciences as we have in the past with game theory and where it is used in business operations or mathematics, but where it is used in the social sciences and in the field of psychiatry. To analyze a conflict scientifically, we must be able to agree on relative values, if you will, to assign utilities. We must learn to be perceptive, to evaluate the other's assignment of utilities. In order to engage in a conflict thus formalized, we must be able to communicate, to give a credible indication to the other of how we assign utilities to outcomes. At times, we must learn the meaning of trust. Trust. Or else, both we and our opponents will invariably lose in games of the Tuscascarpia type. Now, at times, we must be able to convince the other that he ought to play according to certain rules, or even that he ought to play a different game. Now, that has great significance. We say these situations exist. These are the milieu, the environment, our kids today say ecology, in which man exists. Now you must abide by that environment. If you can't, if you're in an occupation and you cannot operate in the realm within the formal walls of that occupation, perhaps it becomes incumbent upon us to say that is the wrong occupation. That is the wrong set of values. I think that idea that it might be the wrong set of values is fraught with a great many meanings. Some could be dangerous, quite dangerous. Now, to convince the other, we must get him to listen to us. And this cannot usually be done if we ourselves do not listen. We go in one door, we go all the way around, we come out the same way. I think the word was communication. We ourselves do not listen. Therefore, we must learn to listen in the broadest sense of listening, in the sense of assuming for a while the other's world outlook. Because only in this way will we make sense of what he is saying. All these skills are related not to know-how, but to wisdom. It may happen that if we acquire the necessary wisdom, many of the conflicts that the strategy experts in their professional zeal insist on formulating as battles of wits, or worse, as a battle of wills, will be resolved of their own accord. The applicability of these factors, the theory of games, to the field of not only psychiatry, but the teaching of psychiatry, the training, I think has great value. Thank you, gentlemen.
Very much, Dr. Fox. Before we have any questions asked of Dr. Fox, we'd like you to fill out our standard questionnaire. All of you familiar with our program certainly know this questionnaire. So what we really want to do is get an indication of what you derived from this presentation. And as you're filling it out, perhaps some of you might have some questions to ask Dr. Fox.
I assume you're using, or at least you experimented with game theory in your own educational scheme at Albert Einstein in doing postgraduate as well as undergraduate education. Do you have any thoughts on how, in as much as I'm running most of the program with regards to our own educational system, how I might better get these kinds of points across to the teachers? How do we go about stimulating them to use these kinds of theories?
Well, I think one possibility is certainly in the use of the first word, game. I think it's much easier to get something across to a student if he feels he's involved. If he's not being talked at and said, okay, here it is, now you can ask questions later. And he can ask questions, but it's the same damn nonsense. You know, he's asking questions of what he's been told. And I think you can utilize game theory here by letting him become involved in it. Again, we go back to that general systems thing. That's why I think the work in that field is so very vital. You play a game with the student. You give him a hypothesis. But you let him involve himself. You don't tell him, now look, this is the thing, you know. What do you think of that? The letter A is built so-and-so. No, you don't do it that way. You say, apparently the letter A is built so-and-so. Now, would we build it the same way together? Would you build it the same way I've built it? Would our results be better if we had a third party come in and help us build it? Help us, I said, not build it. I think that's the big thing, is the idea of breaking down that damnable separation between you and the student.
How come you don't do it?
In what sense don't I?
Well, you gave us a lecture, and then there's questions after the lecture, which is the traditional thing that you just commented on as being less desirable than using some of the games theory of involvement of the student.
Hell of a good point. Now, I'd be lousy if I didn't have an answer for that. At this moment, I'll be lousy. Good point. I suppose I could defend it. But that would be defense. That would be a rationale. That wouldn't be an answer. I could defend it by saying I'm in an area where I wasn't sure you were that familiar with the material. And it was done in an explanatory way. And that's why I did it that way. By God, that's just a rationale. Good point. I'll remember that.
Have you used more interaction with your students in other situations? And so how?
Well, we started with the old classic one, which of course everybody uses. In fact, I used it because it was so old-fashioned, of, you know, opening a jar with a title on it, which was partly obscured, and asking when anybody smelled it, you know. And of course, we had marked a tincture of violet. It was water, you know, and gradually one hand drifted up, and then gradually another, until finally all 10 were up. And it contained no violet. This, in a sense, is the power of suggestion. But we use that to lever into an interaction thing. Because in conjunction with, what is it? I'm sorry, I forgot your name, sir. Dan. What Dan said, it didn't really involve them. It was a lecture approach. Then I did twist it a little and got them to, could they have done the same thing to me? Reversing the situation. And then it so happens, which I cannot go into details now because I'm sorry, we're in the midst of doing some research in the field, we did reverse the situation. I can't go into the mechanics of it, unfortunately, at this particular moment, but we did reverse that situation. Using, in that case, the power of suggestion as a leverage rather than using, or as a lever, rather than using game theory. But we did reverse it. We hope to have some interesting information to publish in that field. But you know, whether you call it communication or reaction or not, it's all the same damn thing. How do you somehow break down the academic wall? And in my experience, it's more than an academic wall, because it's a wall I think exists between doctor and patient. I'm now becoming more and more convinced as time progresses that there is as great a wall between the patient and the doctor as there is between the instructor and the student. That worries me. It exists. I wish it didn't.
I think some of the approaches that have been used in the past in the USC program is the Kaiserian approach, you know, of confrontation, which what I do when I say, why in the hell didn't you do what you say should be done, which is part of this Kaiserian approach. And you know, the predecessor, the previous person, Alan Embel, was a devotee of Kaiser, and I think that has certainly rubbed off on me, not only in teaching, but also in my lifestyle.
May I ask you, did that come as a big shock to you? Did you accept it completely, fully, at once, or did it gradually become part of it?
Gradually.
It was a gradual process. Suppose that could possibly come as a complete shock at one time. I'm wondering. I'm asking. I don't know. Could something like I think that's a fascinating idea. It did come gradually. That would be part of the teaching, the learning process. Could it come rapidly? Could it be accelerated?
I was thinking about the West Coast games players, Eric Byrne and transaction analysis and so forth, which sort of paperback approach the issue. They attempt to make it fast and lucrative, speed it up. The marathon sessions, the concentrated attempts to change people's style by this intensive interaction in some type of, game situation. I'm not convinced that it's lasting or that it works all that well, but there are people that are trying, it seems.
I think the question comes up quite often, we get almost back into semantics, whether we call it game theory or something else. Von Neumann, of course, who was a mathematician, and perhaps one of the most brilliant, certainly since Einstein, in the field, made it work and gave it a name. But I think this is true not merely in this country, but throughout the world, we have a tendency to put labels on things, and then they expand. And I think our approach to game theory is expanding, but we still use game theory as a name. That is why I went into that whole question, you see, of even Rappaport, his article, when he made the point that there is a difference between checkers and poker, because poker has an element of chance where chess and poker, because poker has an element of chance in the deal of the cards, the fall of the card, and chess does not, but chess does. The question of the normal way to select who's going to get the color is to have the umpire, of course, take a black and a white pawn and put them out, and you select one. And if the number of games, as I say, is even, and from that point you alternate, fine. But if the number of games is not even, whoever picks that white pawn has the advantage. So even game theory is not that clean, it's not that precise, it's not that mathematically accurate. It depends a little on the assumptions you make. He had a marvelous example. Had to do with a military strategical problem. And he broke down the problem with a matrix and so on, and finally, at the end of that, taking it from the viewpoint of both the attacking general and the defending general, and finally at the end said, now, the proper solution to this, after a great deal of logical thought along game theory, is that a third party, he calls in a third party, an authority in game theory, and he informs him that what he should do is to toss 2 coins, not 1, 2 coins, and it's the best 2 out of 3 as to which sector he will attack. The same thing is true of the defender. He will toss 2 coins, but in his case it's the best 1 out of 3. It's just 1 choice as to which he will defend. So the element of chance is introduced, but it's an educated chance, which brings us back to the whole damn thing is an educated guess. Your point that you accepted, that you came to think this other thing is on the basis of an educated approach, an educated guess approach.
What's the acceptance level of your students to this kind of approach? Is there resistance or
percentage-wise?
Well, is it something that they accept as opposed to the traditional form of learning? Do they see it as a valid change in terms of their own education?
Well, you've just mentioned the problem. In terms of their own education, some do and some don't, but there's a great deal that has to do with their own educational background as to whether they do or they don't. Percentage-wise, it's quite high. It doesn't start off that way. It gets that way a little later.
Excuse me, could you define the students you're talking about?
In this particular case, the postgraduate students.
And these are specifically?
They are either in the field of clinical psychology or they have an MD and they're going into this kind. It's a very small, and in this sense, not a fair group. It's a fairly elite group, so that one can't. Any generalization in regard to them would be, I think, poorly placed.
Have you worked with non-psychologically oriented groups who are interested but really don't understand the rules or have the frame of reference?
I've only done what Dan called me down for doing. I've only lectured to them. And the reaction was not was bewildered. It was not accepted. In my opinion would be it was not accepted. I'll preface it by that. But it was not... what we did, I suppose, was appalling. I'm reflecting on what Dan has said. What we did was, we preached one thing and practiced something a bit different. I can remember years ago, when in my still not determined youth or undergraduate days as to where the hell I was going to end up, I took a class in something called educational psychology at one of our less well-known Midwestern institutions, Indiana University to be specific. And in the course of the class, I was taught how to all the modern approaches to a child if I were to take a secondary teaching credential. And then at the end of the year, the exam asked me everything specific right out of the book. You know, everything but chapter headings. And I became so rebellious that I wrote on the exam paper, we were supposed to finally write our opinion of the course, and I wrote, you neglected only to ask the color of the text, which was gray on top and blue on the bottom, and there was a gold band running around the middle. I got forgive me, an A, and the suggestion from the professor that I not take any further courses in educational psychology. Which suggestion I accepted wholeheartedly. But it is true. This is the damned problem. Now this is the pregnant field to break down, I think. How can we come up with a theory or with an approach which is really basically new, or if not new, so revamped as to appear new?
Why do we have to?
Because everything changes. Not only communication, everything changes. We cannot hold with the old ones. Certainly, psychiatry itself is enough under fire about the fact that even if psychiatry works, and it's a one-to-one relationship, how the hell are you going to cure everybody? More and more people exist, more and more people are sick. We've got to find new approaches. We can't justify ourselves if we don't find new approaches. At least I don't think so. It's hard to justify at times the profession now. And I certainly wouldn't want to justify it in 25 years. We have to find new approaches. Particularly in the field of training. Because if we don't, I think that the ecology won't matter a hell of a lot. I sometimes think that more important than the fact that ecology is destroying the people, I'm beginning to think that people are destroying the ecology and themselves. So that we'd better find new approaches, I think.
What type of games do you like to play?
Personally? Bridge. Very much. I loathe chess. That's personal. My wife has defeated me over the course of 23 years of married life about 90% of the time in chess. And in ping pong, which does not correspond to to game theory at all, I have won 3 games, and I would venture to say we play roughly 1,000 a year. Bridge is my favorite game. And beside bridge, I enjoy playing Hearts, which is an old-fashioned card game. Some of you may know. A German card game named Scott, which some of you may know. I play a breed of old-fashioned poker called euchre, which is fun because it's a very archaic game. And gambling, I prefer the racetrack to anything else. And game theory doesn't help a hell of a lot there. Something called performance charts are better weighed. Although, of course, you could extend game theory to that too. You really can. And you have, in fact, an interesting choice there, because you don't have a question of one winner. You have a question of, if you play across the board, you have a question of 1, 2, or 3 possible winners. It is a very pregnant area for game theory. I would thought you'd do something on that. I think that would be interesting. I shouldn't have too close to it.
Have you developed a paradigm for your postgraduate students so that they can, in turn, teach other people?
We are working on that now. I have not established one, no. I thought I had. It is not satisfactory. It will require more of my appearances before this type of group and more comments that I can take back with me before I can establish such a, I will call it an order. I think that is probably, for me, the most vital thing that I have to do. Most important. Because, as I say, what we're interested in here is how one goes out to teach those who are going to go be after us. It's the old idea of the educator, whether it's the level of the teacher who goes out to an elementary school or somebody who teaches psychiatrists. That's the most important thing to do. That's where it all starts. I think this is the most crucial thing for me to do. Most crucial. In fact, I think I should probably stop wasting time writing and go to work on that. It may pay a little less, but it might be wiser.
Are there any other questions of Dr. Fox?
Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate it. I want to thank you on behalf of the postgraduate department and the Department of Psychiatry at USC. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me say this. The greatest claim to mathematical fame that Mike Fox has is through his wife Hannah, who teaches the subject at Caltech. The closest he comes to psychiatry is through his brother-in-law, Jerry Jacobson, who many of you know is in charge of the Benjamin Rush Clinic in Los Angeles. Mike is a professional actor. He has simulated a physician in many television shows and movies, the most recent of which is Bloody Mama, in which he played the surgeon. He was the psychiatrist in The Interns and has been the father of a number of recent television programs. He probably had never heard of experiential learning. As a matter of fact, he didn't even know how to pronounce it until yesterday at about 2. Now, we've been set up, or at least we set you up. And the idea of this is to try to simulate a situation in which we're teaching students of psychiatry, doctors out in the community, in which they're often lulled into a position of accepting the music of what we have to say rather than really understanding the lyrics of what we're talking about. And I think Mike has done a very admirable job of this. Now, it's interesting that of the 9 responses we had to this 8th revision of 1967 Form B of the Evaluation Questionnaire, half of us felt that he dwelt on the obvious, and the other half felt that he did not. Almost all of us, with the exception of one person, said that he seemed highly interested in this subject. He did use enough examples to clarify his material, of which he knows nothing. He presented his material in a well-organized form, and indeed, he threw in a lot of non sequiturs. Most of what he did was present a lot of parenthetical, highly qualified phrases, really in an effort to diffuse our thinking, to really not allow us to know what he was even talking about, and he didn't know what he was talking about. He did this quite extemporaneously, and he got a lot of it out of an article which we had copied for him out of Science and out of Scientific American. He did not fail to stimulate any of our thinking. We all felt he stimulated our thinking quite highly. There was one question mark. One respondent had a question mark. All of us except one said he put his material across in a highly interesting way, which I'm sure is of interest to him. And the only thing commendable about our particular group is that at least we're not liars. None of us had ever read any of his books.